Picture this. It's 186 BCE and screams echo through the sacred groves outside Rome as torchlight flickers against twisted bodies engaged in acts so depraved that even battle-hardened Roman soldiers would later refuse to speak of what they witnessed. What started as secret religious ceremonies had become something so sexually violent, so politically dangerous, that it would shatter the Roman Senate's moral authority forever. But here's what your history teacher never told you. This wasn't just about orgies. Hidden within these forbidden rituals was a conspiracy that nearly toppled the Roman Republic itself, involving senators' wives, foreign cults, and a web of blackmail that reached the highest levels of government. The question that haunts historians even today: were the Bacchanalia truly as monstrous as the Senate claimed, or was this the ancient world's most successful political cover-up? By the end of this video, you'll know the shocking truth that Roman sources tried desperately to hide. Tell me in the comments, do you think moral panics are manufactured by those in power, or do they reflect genuine threats to society? Because what happened in 186 BCE will change how you see both ancient Rome and modern politics forever. To understand how religious orgies nearly destroyed the Roman Republic, you need to grasp just how sexually repressive Rome was becoming in the 2nd century BCE. This wasn't the decadent empire you see in Hollywood films. This was the stern, militaristic republic where a woman could be divorced for drinking wine, where fathers legally owned their adult sons' lives, and where sexual purity was considered essential to Rome's military success. The irony? Rome was simultaneously being flooded with foreign influences. Greek philosophy, Eastern mystery religions, and exotic cults were pouring into the city as Roman legions conquered the Mediterranean. Traditional Romans were terrified that these foreign practices would corrupt their legendary discipline and moral superiority. Enter the cult of Bacchus, the Roman version of the Greek god Dionysus, deity of wine, madness, and sexual liberation. For centuries, Bacchanalian festivals had been celebrated openly, featuring wine, theatrical performances, and yes, sexual freedom. But something had changed by 186 BCE. The consul Spurius Postumius Albinus would later claim that what had once been harmless religious celebrations held 3 times a year had transformed into nightly gatherings where political conspiracies were hatched alongside sexual crimes. According to his surviving speech, preserved by the historian Livy, these weren't just parties, they were initiation ceremonies where young Romans were systematically corrupted, blackmailed, and recruited into anti-government plots. But here's what the Senate never admitted. Many of their own wives, daughters, and political allies were deeply involved in these ceremonies. The scandal would expose the hypocrisy at the heart of Roman moral authority, revealing just how far the ruling class had strayed from their own stated values. The conspiracy unraveled through pure chance, or so the official story goes. In 186 BCE, a young Roman named Publius Aebutius was about to undergo initiation into the Bacchanalian mysteries when his mother and stepfather suddenly insisted he participate. What they didn't know was that Aebutius's mistress, a freedwoman named Hispala Faecinia, had already revealed the cult's secrets to him. According to Faecinia's testimony, preserved in Livy's Ab Urbe Condita, she had been forced to participate in initiation ceremonies where young men were sexually assaulted while other participants watched. She described how victims were held down while being violated, their screams drowned out by ritual chanting and clashing cymbals. Those who refused to participate or threatened to expose what they witnessed simply disappeared. But here's the detail that reveals the true scope of this conspiracy. Faecinia claimed that over 7,000 Romans, including numerous senators' wives and prominent citizens, were active members of the cult. She described a highly organized network where sexual blackmail was used to extract political secrets and where initiation ceremonies served as recruitment for anti-government activities. When Bacchus refused initiation, his stepfather cut off his inheritance and threw him out of the house. Desperate, the young man turned to his mother-in-law, who happened to be a close friend of Consul Postumius's wife. Within days, the story had reached the highest levels of Roman government. Postumius's response was swift and brutal. On the night of the Ides of October, he surrounded the sacred grove where the Bacchanalia were being held with armed soldiers. What they found, according to official records, went far beyond sexual impropriety. Hidden chambers contained the bodies of Romans who had attempted to expose the cult. Torture devices were discovered alongside altars where human sacrifice allegedly took place. The subsequent trials revealed the conspiracy's true scope. Under interrogation, cult members confessed to using the rituals as cover for forging wills, arranging murders, and coordinating political opposition to the Senate. Wealthy widows admitted to being coerced into changing their inheritances. Young men testified about being sexually assaulted and then blackmailed into silence. But here's where the story gets complicated. Modern historians have noticed suspicious elements in these confessions. The testimonies were remarkably consistent, almost as if they had been coordinated. The punishments fell disproportionately on foreigners, freed people, and women, groups with little political power. Meanwhile, prominent Roman citizens who were implicated often received surprisingly lenient treatment. The consul's own investigation notes, partially preserved in the Senate's archives, reveal that many of the cult's alleged crimes mirrored political scandals that had nothing to do with the Bacchanalia. Suspicious deaths of wealthy Romans, inheritance disputes, and even some political assassinations were suddenly attributed to the cult, despite evidence suggesting more conventional motives. Most telling of all, the Senate's emergency decree banning Bacchanalian worship throughout the Roman territories came with a curious exception. Private worship was still permitted with official approval, provided it involved fewer than 5 people and included no common fund or priest. In other words, the wealthy could continue their religious practices privately, while the masses were forbidden from gathering. By winter's end, over 6,000 Romans had been executed or imprisoned. The Bacchanalia, as a public phenomenon, was destroyed forever. But in their rush to eliminate a supposed threat to Roman morality, the Senate had revealed something far more damaging: their willingness to manufacture a crisis to consolidate power and eliminate political opposition. The moment that destroyed the Roman Senate's moral authority forever came when Consul Postumius delivered his final speech to the assembled citizens. Standing before the Forum Romanum, he declared that Rome had been purged of foreign corruption and that traditional Roman values had been restored. But the crowd wasn't cheering. They were whispering, because everyone knew what Postumius refused to acknowledge. His own wife had been seen at Bacchanalian gatherings. Senate records show that at least 12 senators' family members were implicated in the cult, yet none faced execution. The consul himself owned a villa where wine-soaked parties regularly featured entertainment that would have fit perfectly into the Bacchanalian rituals he now condemned. The breaking point came when a freed slave named Marcus Plautius publicly challenged Postumius in the Forum. Plautius had survived the purges by providing testimony against other cult members, but he retained detailed records of who had actually attended the ceremonies. His list included not just senators' wives and daughters, but several sitting magistrates and at least one future consul. When Postumius ordered Plautius's immediate arrest for slander, the crowd began to turn. Citizens who had initially supported the crackdown started asking uncomfortable questions. If the Bacchanalia were truly about anti-government conspiracy, why were known political enemies of Rome left untouched while loyal citizens were executed? Why were foreign merchants and freed slaves punished more severely than Roman citizens who committed identical crimes? The consul's response revealed everything. The safety of Rome, he declared, requires that some truths remain unspoken. In that moment, he admitted what everyone suspected. This had never been about protecting Roman morality. It had been about protecting Roman power, and the Senate's reputation as moral guardians of the Republic died with those words. The Bacchanalia Affair didn't just destroy lives, it shattered the psychological foundation of Roman Republican government. For the first time, ordinary Romans witnessed their leaders openly admit that justice was negotiable, that moral authority could be manufactured, and that traditional religious practices could be criminalized overnight when politically convenient. The long-term consequences were devastating. Public trust in the Senate never fully recovered, creating the cynical political atmosphere that would eventually allow strongmen like Pompey, Caesar, and Augustus to present themselves as alternatives to a corrupt republican system. The precedent of using moral panics to justify extraordinary government power would be repeated throughout Roman history, each time further eroding the constitutional limits that had once restrained imperial ambition. But here's the most chilling part. We may never know what really happened in those sacred groves. Modern archaeological excavations near the supposed Bacchanalian sites have found no evidence of torture chambers or mass graves. The cult's alleged crimes are documented only in the testimonies of people who faced execution if they didn't confess to whatever their interrogators wanted to hear. What we do know is that the Roman Senate successfully transformed a religious and cultural phenomenon into a political weapon, using fear of sexual deviance to justify unprecedented government overreach. They created a template that would be used by authoritarian leaders for millennia: identify a marginalized group, exaggerate their threat to traditional values, and use public hysteria to eliminate political opposition while expanding government power. The question that should terrify us isn't whether the Bacchanalia were as monstrous as claimed. It's how easily an entire society can be convinced to surrender their freedoms in the name of protecting their morals. As the Roman historian Tacitus would later write, "The more corrupt the state, the more numerous the laws." The Bacchanalia Affair proved that sometimes the greatest threat to a republic comes not from foreign enemies or domestic rebels, but from leaders who discover that manufactured virtue is more powerful than genuine justice.